In this episode, we move from the idea of reviewing access to the equally important work of removing it cleanly when the original need no longer exists. Many beginners first think about access control as the act of granting permissions, creating accounts, and getting people into the systems they need for work. That is only half the story, because every account, group membership, shared credential, application role, and connection should also have an ending point tied to a real business need. Deprovisioning is the process of taking away access that should no longer remain, and it becomes especially important when people leave, move to different jobs, finish projects, or when systems themselves are retired or replaced. If access is added carefully but removed casually, risk starts piling up in the background. Clean deprovisioning is what keeps old permissions, forgotten accounts, and leftover connections from turning into quiet weaknesses that nobody notices until something goes wrong. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. At a basic level, deprovisioning means disabling, removing, or reducing access when it is no longer justified by a current role, relationship, or operational need. In identity and access management, IAM, this is usually described as part of the full access lifecycle, which includes onboarding, changes during employment or service, and the ending or reduction of access when circumstances change. The key idea is that access should follow reality. If a person is no longer in a position, no longer assigned to a project, or no longer working with an organization, the access tied to that past situation should not continue as if nothing changed. A clean process does not only focus on the main user account. It also looks at application roles, group memberships, remote access rights, privileged accounts, shared resources, tokens, automated processes, and any other path that still gives that identity reach into the environment. Deprovisioning matters because systems remember old permissions long after people stop thinking about them. One reason this topic matters so much is that organizations are very good at creating access quickly when business pressure is high. New hires need to work on day one, contractors need tools for a deadline, and temporary project teams need collaboration access right away. The removal side is often less urgent in daily practice, even though it carries just as much security value. When access lingers after a role change or departure, the organization is keeping old doors unlocked for no current reason. That leftover access may never be misused, but security cannot depend on hope. A former employee account that still works, a vendor login that still connects remotely, or a service account that still has broad privileges can all become entry points for mistakes, compromise, or abuse. Clean deprovisioning turns access into a controlled business decision instead of a permanent technical artifact. It keeps the environment aligned with current needs instead of historical accidents. A very common misunderstanding is that deprovisioning only matters when someone leaves the organization entirely. In reality, some of the most important deprovisioning events happen when people stay, but their duties change. A promotion may require new access, but also make some older permissions unnecessary. A move from finance to operations might mean old reporting rights, approval capabilities, or access to sensitive records should disappear even though the person is still trusted and still employed. Temporary project access is another classic example. If someone helped a merger team, supported an audit, or covered for a supervisor during leave, those permissions should not quietly become a permanent part of the person's profile once the special situation ends. Beginners sometimes assume that keeping extra access is harmless because the person is already known to the organization. The real issue is not whether the person is good or bad. The issue is whether the permissions still match the current business need and whether excess access expands risk without any real benefit. The word clean is important because removing access poorly can create both security problems and business problems. If deprovisioning is rushed, an organization may disable one obvious account, but leave behind several connected paths, such as application-specific logins, shared mailbox access, cloud roles, remote connectivity, or cache credentials on unmanaged devices. If it is handled carelessly, important files may become orphaned, service disruptions may occur, or ownership may be lost over automated jobs that still need a new responsible party. Clean deprovisioning means the removal is complete, deliberate, and coordinated. It is not just about cutting off access fast. It is about understanding what should be removed, what should be transferred, what should be archived, and what should be documented so the business can continue safely. Security work often fails when teams think only in terms of turning something off. Good deprovisioning asks a broader question about how to end access in a way that reduces risk without creating confusion, outages, or hidden leftovers. When a person leaves an organization, the timing of deprovisioning becomes especially sensitive. The goal is to ensure access ends according to policy and business need, with coordination between management, human resources, HR, information technology, IT, security teams, and system owners. Some departures are routine and planned, while others are immediate and require tighter control and faster action. In either case, access should not remain active simply because nobody has completed the paperwork or because one department assumed another would take care of it. A clean process usually means the organization knows which identities exist, which systems they touch, which elevated roles they hold, what remote access paths are available, and whether the individual has any non-standard or temporary permissions that need special handling. That visibility is what makes rapid and accurate action possible. Without it, organizations end up disabling the obvious account while leaving behind the exact obscure access paths that attackers or disgruntled insiders would love to find. Role changes inside the organization create a more subtle challenge because the identity often remains active while the access profile should change significantly. This is where many environments struggle, since teams naturally focus on adding the permissions needed for the new role and give less attention to removing what belonged to the old one. The result is an account that reflects everything the person has ever done instead of only what the person does now. Over time, that creates a powerful blend of inherited permissions, old group memberships, and special exceptions that nobody fully remembers. Clean deprovisioning during role changes means taking away access that no longer fits before or while granting the new access, not months later if someone happens to notice. That approach supports least privilege because it keeps the access footprint close to the actual duties of the current position. It also protects employees from being placed in situations where they can still influence data, systems, or approvals that are no longer part of their job and no longer within their proper accountability. Systems also change, and deprovisioning should follow those changes just as carefully as it follows people. When an application is retired, migrated, replaced, or merged into another platform, the organization needs to think beyond the technical cutover. Old accounts, administrative roles, service connections, scheduled jobs, and identity integrations can remain active long after the business has mentally moved on to the new system. That creates dangerous blind spots because the old environment may receive less monitoring, fewer patches, and less active ownership even while access still exists. Beginners often imagine that once a system is no longer used for daily work, it is effectively gone. In practice, systems can become ghost environments that still hold data and still trust old credentials. Clean deprovisioning in these situations means formally removing or disabling access, closing integrations that are no longer needed, transferring retained data appropriately, and making sure the old system does not remain a quiet side door into the broader environment. Another area beginners should understand is the importance of non-human identities during deprovisioning. Not every identity belongs to a person. Organizations also rely on service accounts, application accounts, automated jobs, application programming interface credentials, tokens, certificates, and integration identities that allow systems to communicate with one another. These often receive elevated permissions because they perform important background tasks, and they may persist for years without the kind of visibility that employee accounts usually receive. When systems change, vendors change, software is retired, or automation is redesigned, these non-human identities must be deprovisioned just as carefully as user accounts. Otherwise, old integrations may keep working with broad privileges nobody still needs. That can be especially risky because such identities are often difficult to notice during normal daily work. Clean deprovisioning means knowing which automated identities exist, what they can access, which processes still depend on them, and when their privileges should be reduced or removed entirely. Forgotten machine access is still access, and from a security perspective, it can be just as dangerous as forgotten human access. It is also important to understand the relationship between deprovisioning and data ownership. When a person leaves or changes roles, access should be removed, but the organization must also decide what happens to the information, resources, and responsibilities that person managed. Shared drives, collaboration spaces, case files, customer records, security alerts, inboxes, dashboards, and workflows do not disappear just because one account is disabled. If no ownership transfer happens, the organization may lose continuity or leave sensitive material in a confusing state. Clean deprovisioning, therefore, includes both subtraction and reassignment. The old access is removed, but necessary business functions are handed to the right successor with proper authorization and oversight. This is one reason why deprovisioning should not be viewed as a purely technical task. It sits at the boundary between security, operations, records handling, and accountability. When done well, it protects the organization without interrupting legitimate work. When done poorly, it can either leave dangerous gaps in access control or cause teams to work around security because important resources suddenly became inaccessible without a plan. A simple example can make the concept easier to see. Imagine an employee who worked in payroll and had access to compensation records, approval workflows, and a secure file share used for salary adjustments. That employee later moves into a training role and no longer needs direct access to payroll systems. If the organization only adds new learning platform permissions but forgets to remove the payroll-related rights, the account now spans two very different trust zones with no business reason. A mistake, a compromise, or even a casual curiosity incident could expose sensitive information far outside the employee's current duties. Now imagine that the same person also kept access to an old remote connection, an archived shared mailbox, and a reporting tool tied to the previous department. None of those leftovers may stand out on their own, but together they create a much larger risk picture. Clean deprovisioning prevents that buildup by treating access changes as full lifecycle events rather than as one-way additions layered on top of one another forever. Many organizations learn the hard way that incomplete deprovisioning is not always visible until after an incident. A former contractor account may still function because nobody closed a linked external identity. A departed administrator may have left behind a privileged account used only for rare maintenance. A retired system may still trust an old account that can access sensitive data without modern controls around it. These are not dramatic science fiction scenarios. They are ordinary consequences of weak process discipline in environments that change constantly. Security incidents often reveal not only a technical weakness, but also an ownership weakness, where teams lacked a clear answer to who was responsible for ending access when the original need ended. Clean deprovisioning reduces this uncertainty by making access removal a defined responsibility tied to real triggers, not an optional cleanup task that happens only when someone has extra time. In security, unfinished cleanup often becomes tomorrow's exposure. Another misconception worth addressing is the belief that disabling one primary login solves the whole problem. In many environments, an identity can have multiple connected forms of access, including local accounts, cloud roles, software as a service permissions, shared resource access, virtual private network connectivity, privileged accounts, developer platform keys, mobile device trust, and persistent browser sessions. If deprovisioning only touches the most visible account, the organization may feel safe while several hidden paths remain active. Clean removal, therefore, depends on good visibility across the environment. Teams need to know which systems recognize the identity, where permissions are inherited through groups, what special exceptions were granted, and whether any devices, integrations, or application-specific roles still accept that user or system. This is also why documentation and inventory matter so much in security. You cannot reliably remove what you do not know exists. Strong deprovisioning is really a test of organizational awareness as much as a test of technical capability. By the end of this discussion, The most important lesson is that access should have an ending just as clearly as it has a beginning. Deprovisioning is not a side task or an administrative courtesy. It is a core security control that keeps identity, privilege, and system trust aligned with present reality instead of outdated history. When roles change, people leave, projects end, vendors rotate, or systems are retired, old access must be removed cleanly, completely, and with proper coordination so that nothing powerful remains behind by accident. That discipline protects data, reduces attack surface, supports least privilege, and preserves operational continuity by ensuring ownership is transferred where necessary and access is ended where it should be. Good security depends on more than deciding who gets access. It depends on ending access with the same care used to grant it. When organizations learn to deprovision cleanly, they stop treating old permissions as harmless leftovers and start treating them as risks that deserve real control.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.